At the airport on the way here, I encountered a mother with her 9-year-old son in the elevator. And I had on my shirt that said Education Revolution. And the mother asked me, well, what did that mean? And I said I was an educational consultant. And so her son said, well, what do you do for work? What do you actually do? And I said, well, among other things, we help to start schools in which you don't have to go to classes unless you want to. And you could choose any class to go to. And the decisions are made democratically. And you would have the same vote as your teacher. Without hesitation, the boy said, sign me up! I almost always get this reaction from children. They know they are natural learners. Almost no student under 11 years old ever says, but how do I learn? Only older students and parents sometimes ask that. This is because the human spirit is resilient, and it takes at least 6 or 7 years before that natural ability to learn starts to become extinguished. The educational approach in the large majority of schools in the world today seem to still be based on the theory that children are naturally lazy and need to be forced to learn. Why is this? Perhaps because the educational bureaucrats who continue to control the system are the products of it. This may be why true change does not take place, despite the fact that modern brain research clearly shows that children are natural learners. Ever since the compulsory state government education system was created more than 150 years ago, there have been important educational pioneers who have disagreed with the traditional authoritarian approach in most schools. These include people like Francisco Ferrer, who started the modern school movement in Spain, Maria Montessori, who started the Montessori schools, Rudolf Steiner, who started the Waldorf schools, John Dewey, who started the progressive school movement, and A.S. Neal, who started Summerhill in England. Let's see if this is going to work. That's good. So this is Summerhill. I've visited Summerhill many times, and will visit on my way back there from here. I'm a kind of a part-time table tennis teacher every year or two. I go there and teach table tennis. It's interesting. They said one day, in 5 minutes, I can double your ability. But anyway, that's a whole other thing. Is there a table here? So here I am with Zoe, who is Neil's daughter. Now, how could this be if he started it in the 1920s? Well, he had her at the age of 64. And, of course, decisions are made at Summerhill meetings democratically. And there's a funny story about this one. The meeting had made a decision that games could not be played in the computer room in the morning. So they passed the computer out the window so they could play. Anyway, there's a worldwide network of learner-centered schools and programs for all age levels. That works. This network is growing rapidly as people become more and more dissatisfied with an unchanging traditional system. It's important to understand that if you believe that people are born natural learners, you wouldn't have competitive grades, forced homework, or even grade levels. Just think what an artificial situation that is, to be in a room with 25 or 30 people of your exact same age. This is never going to happen to you again in your life. Why do we socialize kids to it, to that strange, bizarre configuration? Also consider the absurdity of grades and testing. If you go to a library, they assume that you want to learn something, and it's your business. They do not make you sit down and test and grade you on the way out. Why should school be different? Learner-centered schools are everywhere. For example, we help support the Sri Aurobindo Ashram Orphanage in Kathmandu, Nepal. The founder, who himself was a young runaway, left Nepal at 12 years old, educated himself in India, went to the Sri Aurobindo Ashram there, and then actually came back and named this for them. Here they are. It's a school that was under construction there. And Sri Aurobindo was sort of like the Indian John Dewey. Started progressive education there. What they do with children there is unbelievable. For example, I met a 12-year-old boy. We had raised funds so that they could come to our conference in 2003. He had originally been brought to the ashram as a 3-year-old. Now, 10 years later, he's getting his doctorate in physics in Germany at the age of 22. There are hundreds of such schools. They're all very different from each other. In Albany, New York, the free school operates on income from buildings that they have bought at auctions and rehabilitated, and they raise the funds that way so that any kid can go to their school. In Israel, there's a network of 25 public democratic schools, originally started by Yaakov Hecht, that's Yaakov, who now is working with mayors to change the education in entire cities. I'm working with young teachers from Saudi Arabia who are organizing a boarding democratic school for Syrian refugee orphans in Turkey. And in an Eastern European country, I did a consultation last year with a group which has just opened a homeschool resource center, the first in its country. There's an inner city public school that runs democratically, and the students have a constitutional right to leave any class without explanation. It's called the School of Self-Determination, and it is in Moscow, Russia. And here is a picture of one of the projects when I visited there with the students were doing with Holocaust survivors. What these schools and programs have in common is that they are learner-centered and empower the students. And I'm going to show you a little video now of what some of this looks like around the world. Actually, I'm not going to show you. They're going to show you, I hope. You were wondering. Prominently. Home education is one of the fastest growing alternatives in the world. Almost 30 years ago, when John Holt's groundbreaking book, Teach Your Own, was published, there were about 20,000 home educated in the United States. It's now estimated that there are more than 2 million and several hundred thousand in England, for example. But home education is not legal everywhere. It is legal here in Norway. It's legal in Denmark. But it's illegal in Sweden. In fact, a child was dramatically taken from his parents there, removed from a plane when they were trying to leave the country. And in fact, they're still trying to get their child back. And while I was here, I received a plea from a family that is from Sweden and trying to find a place to stay in England. They had to flee the country. It's illegal in Germany. One couple was given asylum in the USA after they fled Germany with their children. But in most places where it's legal, starting a home education center is a good way to start a new learner-centered alternative. Now, I help people to start new alternatives. And we've helped start at least 50 in the last few years. One of the most important early lessons I learned about how to do this was from Arthur Morgan. Morgan was a pioneer innovator at Antioch University in the early 20th century. He created the first cooperative education program at universities in which up to half of the students' learning is experiential through internship. And this idea is now spread around the world. Morgan also started a progressive elementary school for his children in the 20s, which is still going today, in the town of Yellow Springs, Ohio. Well, I was lucky enough to meet Arthur Morgan when I was getting my master's degree in the 60s. Yeah, the 60s. He was in his 90s. I wanted to start a democratic interracial recreation center in Yellow Springs while I was there. So I went to see him for advice. Among other things, he suggested that I get funding for the project from the local council so that when I left there to finish my degree, there'd still be funding for it. I got the funding and had several meetings with large groups of interested students, but had trouble finding a location for the center. I thought I'd found one in an unused wing on the main street of the town, but the church turned us down. So I went back to meet with Morgan again to ask him what to do, and learned one of the most important things I've ever learned about how to get things done from the old Quaker. And I'm going to try to bring him back to life for a few seconds here. So I walked into the office, and he was there. He's kind of tall but stooped over, mid-90s. And I explained to him the situation. And as I was talking to him, he slowly turned away from me, and I was thinking, is he all there? And he picked up the phone, and he started to dial. This is how we used to do it, like that, And he's calling one of the 2 millionaires in town, one of his former students, Morris Bean. Hello, Morris? Yeah, this is Arthur Morgan. Well, I'm fine. Well, you remember a few years ago when the church was trying to expand and they said they were going to help the whole community and they did some fundraising. Well, there's some young people trying to start a recreation center and went to the church and the church turned them down. You put money into that, didn't you? I thought so. If you could just get me the names of the others. Yeah, hold on. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. He looked up to me and he said, I think that this is ethical. And a week later, at 1 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call from the church. They'd been rethinking my request. And could I please come down the next morning to the church? And I came down the next morning, had a meeting with them, and a week later, the recreation center, the first interracial recreation center in Yellow Springs, opened. and it eventually evolved into a community center, which is going to this day. And I wonder if people realize that this is something else that they owe to Arthur Morgan. So I got my master's degree from Antioch, now known as Antioch University, New England, and I did my undergraduate work before that at another progressive college called Goddard College. Goddard was founded by Dr. Royce Stanley Pitkin, whom we call Tim. He was born just a few miles from the college, but eventually got his doctorate at Teachers College in New York, studying with the renowned and previously mentioned John Dewey. In 1938, he got Dewey and others to help him remake Goddard into what it was and still is one of the most radical higher education alternatives. At Goddard, there were no grades, no tests. You created your own major, did independent studies whenever you wanted, and I learned a great deal by studying about education from Pitkin. After I graduated, I had started my own democratic school, and Tim Pitkin agreed to come to the school to speak at our graduation in 1980. And by so doing, he kind of completed a circle of sorts because John Dewey was born a block away from where our school was. Amazing. And he spoke about Dewey. He came to the graduation and he spoke about Dewey. And he told this story, which indicated what Dewey thought about educational testing and the absurdity of it. And it's as relevant today as it was then. And now I'm going to try to recreate Tim Pitkin telling this story about John Dewey. He said, Dewey said that educational testing is something like the way in the rural area they used to try to find the weight of a hog. It's a Vermont accent. Try to find the weight of a hog. They would take the hog and they'd take a big board and they'd put it over a rock and they would try to find a big stone that was about the weight of the hog. And then when they found one, they'd try to guess the weight of the stone. In other words, they were testing nothing. and I think that it's amazing, actually, that the whole mania about testing is the opposite of the learner-centered approach that we believe in. It's trying to steer it coming from a long way away rather than actually dealing with the individual student and their needs. And something has to be done about it. Antioch and Goddard are two of the higher education alternatives that we list among dozens on our website. Some have been around for a long time. Others have recently started, like Black Mountain Soul, located on the former site of the original Black Mountain College, a very radical school from the 20s to the 40s that had people like Buckminster Fuller and Paul Goodman there. SOUL stands for Self-Organized Learning Environment, which speaks for itself. And that's a new school that just started, a new college. So now to the most important part of my talk. What can you do if you're a parent, teacher, or student? If you're a student here in the audience, you can do what some have done at other universities. You can organize student-led classes based on student interest. They don't have to be for credit, but you could seek it if you think you can get it. If you're a classroom teacher, you'd be amazed at the power of democratic process. You can be frank about the restrictions of your situation, but let them be free to make decisions in areas where you have the authority to do so. And the interesting thing is, yesterday, from the hotel here in town, I Skyped with a class, a Montessori class in Florida, talking to students about how they could actually start democratic process there. They were interested in that. If you're a parent or a teacher, and you believe that children are natural learners, you could organize your own school or homeschool resource center, and you need them. And I could help you do that if you need assistance. My mission is the education revolution. I want to see learner-centered, empowering education as a possibility for all students everywhere. Thank you.